Okay, you guys ready to dive right in? So it's only 16 verses, so let's read it together as if you hadn't read it enough. And it came about in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim, that they made war. Who did they make war with? Well, with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Biresha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zeboim. Oh, and the king of Bela. That's Zoar. And all these kings came as allies to the valley of Siddim. That's the Salt Sea. And for 12 years they had served Chedorlaomer. But in the 13th year, they rebelled. And in the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, they came. And they defeated the Rephaim in Ashtaroth Karnaim, and the Zuzim in Ham, and the Emim in Shavakiriatim, and the Horites on their Mount Seir, as far as El Paran, which is by the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to En Mishpat, that's Kadesh, and conquered all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites who lived in Hazazon Tamar. And the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that's Zoar, came out. And they lined up for battle against them in the valley of Siddim, against Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of Goyim, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar. 4 kings against 5. Now, the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits. And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and they fell into them. But those who survived fled into the hill country. And then they, so the 4 kings, took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food supply and departed. Oh yeah, they also took Lot, Abram's nephew, and his possessions and departed. Remember, he was living in Sodom. Then a survivor came and told Abram the Hebrew. Now he was residing by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite. What's he doing living with an Amorite? You know, Mamre, brother of Eshcol and brother of Aner, and they were allies with Abram. This is news. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So when Abram heard that his relative had been taken captive, he led out his trained men, born in his house, 318, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. Then he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. He brought back all the possessions and also brought back his relative Lot with his possessions and also the women and the people. Okay, what in the world just happened? So up till now, in this story, we've already seen two big risks taking place to the divine promise that Yahweh made to Abram, the promise that he would be blessed with land, that he would have many descendants, and that through him and through his descendants, the nations would be blessed. That's the divine promise. And the first risk was initiated by Abram himself when he goes to Egypt because of a plague. And there's a risk because of how he used Sarai as a shield, that Sarai could have gotten pregnant. And that would have put this promise of the descendants and this chosen line at risk. So it was a risk of sin. And then we found out last week that there was another big risk that he took, and that was by offering Lot whatever portion of the land that he chose. So left or right, this is facing east, left or right would have been north and south. This is the Canaan hill country that was promised to Abram, and he's willing to give it away, or at least half of it. And that's, high tension, suspense, suspenseful music playing. And it's a risk of him being generous and gracious. But Lot, of course, while he's facing east, he sees this beautiful, lush valley. It looks like the Garden of Eden to him, and it just so happens that Sodom and Gomorrah are there, but hey, that's the place I want. So, he didn't actually choose any of the promised land itself. And in response to his gracious generosity and risking what had been promised to him, Yahweh said, no, you're going to get everything. You're going to get even beyond what you think. It's going to be north, south, east, and west. It's going to be yours and your families. Well, now there's another risk. And it's another risk of grace, because Abram is going to risk his life. And so remember, we have this tension in the Bible that has recurred multiple times already between the older and the younger relative. And the older, of course, in ancient society, the older gets, he's the heir. He gets the good stuff. The younger just has to make do. But in the Bible, it's flipped around. And it's like, what is going on here? And so the elder sometimes gets rather envious. And bad things happen or can happen to the younger. That little pattern is not over. We're going to see this again as we continue to study the book of Genesis over time. Well, here's this risk and tension again. I mean, the younger, he made his choice, right? It was a bad choice, so let it be. What is the older going to do? He's actually going to risk his life to rescue Lot. And so this little story here is the first biblical report of warfare. Not the last, but the first. Remember, we've talked about before the principle of first mention as we study the Bibles. When something is mentioned for the first time, that it clues us in or gives some interpretive lenses to the other times that it happens in the biblical narrative. So this is a theme that in Scripture, as we look at this story, that helps frame the subsequent mention of warfare. So we should note some important features of this battle with that in mind. First of all, who are the characters? It's nations against nations. Abram, he is not involved with provoking the violence. He's not engaging in it so that he can get rich out of the scheme, out of the battle. When he enters battle, it's for the purpose of rescuing Lot, and there's collateral rescuing that takes place as well. What we will see by the end of class here, because we're going to read an ancient Egyptian king's account of a certain battle, which is like so nerdy, I know, but I think it's cool. But ancient Near Eastern warfare records, They're full of battle details many times, the size of the opposing armies, the number of warriors who were killed, descriptions of the booty, that means plunder. They're usually just extolling the virtues of the king who claims that he won the battle, how great he is, what gods favored him, and so on. But here, we don't see any of that typical stuff. It's empty of all these bragging rights that we read in other ancient battle accounts. What's going on? But there are, if you have noticed, this wealth of names and places that are repeated. Have you noticed that? It's like all these weird names and strange places. And it's almost as if the Moses writing team wants to squarely place this event in the context of the familiar world of those who are hearing this for the first time. I think for sure that's part of what's going on. And so with all these normal details that you would normally experience in an ancient war narrative completely gone, the narrator invites us to zero in on the details which are there. Remember, biblical authors, they don't, especially in the Hebrew Bible, they don't like to just give extraneous details, just, to set the atmosphere and the mood. They hardly ever do that. If there's a detail, there's a reason for it. It's not just throwing something in because it happened, because tons of things happen that they leave out. So if they leave in something that happened, it's for a reason. The details are meaningful. They're not just random snippets. So let's break this down, shall we? And it came about in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim. So the names of these kings, we don't have archaeological records of these particular kings at this time in history saying, oh, this is when this one lived and was king of the Elamites, or this is when this one lived who was king in Shinar, which is the Babylonian region. But they do correspond with the kinds of names that one would expect from these nations. There are big gaps in the histories of how long, which king was king of what, where. Tons of that has been missing. But they are names that are familiar to those regions. And they're not listed in this particular list. Other places they're mixed up in this segment. But this first mention of them, it's not listing them in order of importance or power or who is in charge, but in the alphabetical order in the Hebrew alphabet, which I think is kind of cool. The places relate to powerful nations in the international stage. There is international civilization exists at this time. And the nations have the powerful nations have quite a network of trade agreements and treaties going on with each other. The ancient world at this particular time is quite sophisticated. Now, what was I going to say? At about 1150 BC, everything collapsed. It's called the Bronze Age collapse, but that's for another time. Okay, Shinar. What is Shinar? That is the region that's associated with Babylon. Babylon and other cities surrounding Babylon are in the plains of Shinar. This is where the Tower of Babel or Babylon was built. So this is the east. East and Shinar are always associated with each other. Elasar, there's debate on where Elasar is exactly, but probably it's a region on the southern coast of the Black Sea, known later as Pontus, but anyway, it's north. So we've got east, we've got north. Elam was a very powerful kingdom at this time, encompassing part of present-day Iran. So it's in the southern part. It's south. It is further east than Shinar, but it's in the southernmost portion of that area. Goyim is not a particular place. It means nations. Some scholars think that it represents a federation of Western nations, which included the Hittites, which would be to the west. So you've got east, north, south, west. And the idea seems to be that nations from every direction are joining forces to chastise and to plunder the land that Abram has been promised. But it gets a little squirrely. So what happens? They made war with Bela, king of Sodom, and with Bi-Rasha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela. That's so hard. Okay, why do I do that when it's in parentheses? Because the way the New American Standard Bible works is when it puts things in parentheses, it's the Bible translator's opinion, and I happen to agree in this case. What does my agreement mean? But that this is somebody from the Moses writing team, future, speaking to the Israelites who are reading it for the first time, saying, you don't know this place as Bela, you know it as Zoar, which came to be the name of the place later. So they're punching in some future information. So, oh, yeah, I never heard of Bela, but I know what Zoar is. And all of these kings came as allies. This is the 5 kings of the Jordan basin here. They came as allies to that valley of Siddim. That's the Salt Sea. So again, the idea here is that region was lush and fertile, but at some point it stopped being known. We'll find out in 5 chapters why. It stopped being known for being so lush and fertile and became known as being the place where this salty Dead Sea is. So the list of the 5 Canaanite kings is also alphabetical. Bela of Sodom. What does Bela mean? It's a compound name. Ra, some of you know, what does Ra mean? Bad. Is bad. It can be bad as in evil, or it could be bad as in that fruit is rotten, right? Is bad. Bi-Rasha of Gomorrah is also a compound name. Rasha means wicked. So you've got bad and wicked, the 2 kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. This is likely, because biblical authors do this, these are nicknames given by the Moses team to express a point about them. They're not claiming that these were the names given by their moms when they were born, okay, or their dads. The claim is this is what they are to be known as. So the location, and this happens in other places in the Bible, for sure. In the book of Ruth it happens. I forget his name now, but the kinsman of Boaz, in the Hebrew translation of his name, which is very difficult, is kind of like what's his face, right? Because and partly because he chooses to be a non-influencer in the story, so he becomes known as that, just that guy, and that's a nickname that's given to him. I think that's what's happening here. So all of these towns seem to be in that valley that Lot chose for being lush, like the Garden of Eden, like the Nile in Egypt, which later becomes not so lush, and associated with the Dead Sea. Verse 4. So for 12 years, these 5 cities had served Chedorlaomer, but in the 13th year, they rebelled. And so this is where we learn that the Elamite king, Chedorlaomer, was the leader of the 4 international armies. He was the top dog. And the Canaanite Dead Sea kings were subject to him. They were paying him tribute. They were giving him cash over time, but they decided to stop doing that and rebelled. They went, why should we give you our money anymore? And that was the cause of the invasion. Verse 5. And in the 14th year, so 12 years they served, sent him money. Year 13, they didn't. Year 14, here comes the armies. In the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him came and defeated the Rephaim. That's not one of the 5 cities. in Ashtaroth Karnaim, and the Zuzim in Ham, and the Yamim in Shava Kiriathaim, and the Horites on their Mount Seir. Dun, dun, dun. Okay. As far as El Paran, which is by the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to En Mishpat, Kadesh, and conquered all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites who lived in Hazazon Tamar. Okay. All sorts of things going on here, which I think you will think is cool if you have any nerdiness at all. This international alliance of kings, they come to Canaan from the north. Remember, invading armies that are coming into Canaan, they always come from the north. The reason being, even if they're from the east, they're not going to make a direct beeline from east to west because that's crossing a desert and you don't want to kill your army before you get there. So you follow the Fertile Crescent. You follow the Tigris-Euphrates rivers and then to the lusher valleys and what's now Syria, and you come down from the north because you can actually provision and feed and water your armies. So northern armies coming, it doesn't mean that the point of origin of those armies is from the north. It just means that's the route that they take. That's important when you read in later biblical prophecies what's going on. So the Rephaim, so what happens is these invading armies, they're encountering other people before they get to this valley, which is in the southern portion. And these other people that they encounter aren't necessarily like, oh yes, please walk through our land. They're coming up against them. And the first ones that are mentioned are the Rephaim. And in the Bible, the Rephaim are associated with the Nephilim. Remember them. Rephaim and Nephilim are they're cousins. So Nephilim, these are usually translated giants in the scriptures, and they're the result of what happened in Genesis 6 when the sons of Elohim, the sons of God, got an interest and saw how beautiful were the daughters of Adam, the daughters of men, and they married them. Oh, and that's when the Nephilim show up. So again, just a quick reminder, this is not the biblical authors telling people for the first time that are like, oh, you mean corrupt spiritual beings somehow intermarried with humans and produce these human spiritual hybrids? I've never heard this before. That's not what's happening. What's happening is everybody already knew about these spiritual human hybrids walking around. Most nations, almost all nations, had some sort of founding hero that they believed was one of these beings, but they didn't see them as bad. They saw them as great. Think Hercules, right? Father was Zeus, mother was a human woman. Think almost all the Greek heroes, if you know Greek mythology. Well, this was all constant in the ancient Near East. Sumerians had Gilgamesh. These are like, they would say demigods, or they had divine parentage. Well, what's happening in Genesis 6 is the Moses team is reframing that expectation of people saying, well, our founder was a great hero. His dad was a spiritual being. And they're saying, that's not a good thing. It's terrible. This is bad. Well, these Rephaim are associated with these beings. So here they are. They're also associated with the regions of Bashan, which in the Bible is associated with the corrupt spiritual powers. Mount Hermon is like the place of the corrupt spiritual powers, kind of like Mount Zion is portrayed as the mountain of the Lord, or Mount Sinai would be the mountain of the Lord. Mount Hermon, that's the baddies, okay? But that's where they live. Later, they're also associated in a weird way that maybe we'll talk about later with unclean spirits. It's so weird, it's wonderful. It's so cool. But yeah, so, all right, I'm just gonna tell you. In the period leading up to the New Testament, unclean spirits didn't mean run-of-the-mill demons. There's more to it than that. Unclean spirits were a specific type of corrupt spiritual being associated with the spirits of the dead Rephaim and Nephilim. That was an unclean spirit. Not the sons of Elohim that intermarried with the women. That's another class of spirit who are in the abyss. In the minds of the period between the Old and New Testament, that's where people's heads were at. So when they heard unclean spirits, it was a particular type of spirit. So this group, the Rephaim, they're the northernmost, they're most formidable of the Canaanites, of course they are. And they're also the first to be defeated by the full power of this international alliance. And then there's the Zuzim. Have no idea, I don't know who the Zuzim are. I don't think anybody knows. But they are Canaanites. And one thing we do know from the text is they're associated somehow with Ham. Remember Ham, son of Noah, did something sketchy in the tent, and his son Canaan was cursed as a result. Anyway, that's another whole rabbit hole. But he dishonored his father somehow. So the Rephaim are associated with beings that violated a border, okay? The border between the spiritual realm and the earthly realm, and they did it in a way that they weren't supposed to do it. Ham is associated with violating a border, right? He did something with his father or related to his father somehow that was a violation of a border. It was something that he shouldn't have done. And then you've got the Emim, and these people are sometimes equated with the Rephaim. They are in Deuteronomy chapter 2. So they're also qualifying as a tribe of Nephilim. The Horites. The Horites are possibly, there's a people known as the Hurrians, and they're associated with the wilderness, which is important because the ancient reader associates two things with a pre-created state of disorder. One is the sea, and the other is the wilderness and the desert, because they're disordered. You can't live there properly. But these people found a way to live there. So they're chaos people, probably people that live in the Sinai Peninsula. To the ancient Israelites, who would live out in nothingness? It's like imagining people living in the ocean without land. I mean, it's chaotic. The Amalekites. So after these international armies destroy these other people, they turn north to Kadesh Barnea, where the later Israelites camped a lot during their wandering, and which is at the southern border of Canaan. See, they've made their way down. And the Amalekites were a nomadic people, later clashed with the Israelites, and the Amorites also are mentioned, which are also associated in the Bible with the Rephaim and related to the Nephilim, at least to some degree. So all these tribes that so far the International Alliance are attacking are associated with chaos, associated with rebellion, associated with the spawn of corrupt spiritual beings. And you begin to wonder, wait, are these invading people, are they really that bad if they're going to war against all these corrupt, chaos, spiritual, hybrid, bad folks? Who should I be rooting for? Verse 8. And so the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah, both upstanding people as they are, the king of Admah and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, Zor, came out. And they lined up for battle against them in the valley of Siddim. Excited to hear all the details of this battle? We ain't getting them. They're not important to the biblical authors. Right when the tension is the highest, right when the listener or the reader is like, okay, I want to know how, it's been building up to all these other people being fought. Now the armies are finally facing each other. Give me the good stuff. And the biblical authors choose this moment to insert a very important line. It's not a random detail. getting ahead of myself, but we're going to read it. So here's, well, after it mentions all the kings again, 4 kings against 5. So all the international army, north, south, east, and west. Here comes this coalition of, I don't think they're really so bad if they're going against all these chaos people, fighting kings of places like Sodom and Gomorrah. So Sodom and Gomorrah, the way that it's pictured in Scripture, this quote unquote lush valley of people that are wicked and bad. Think Mordor, right? if you know Lord of the Rings. This is bad. So whoever these other guys are, they can't be that bad. And then it says in verse 10, this very important verse, when you're ready to hear the details of the battle. Now the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits. What possible relevance does that have? It does. And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and they fell into them. Those who survived fled to the hill country. Okay, so the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, represented by their kings here, they fall into these pits of semi-flammable liquid, and then the survivors flee to the hills. So, with all the things that the Moses team has left out, to throw that in is begging us to see the foreshadowing. We have Sodom and Gomorrah being reckoned with somehow by this bitumen, this tar, which is also associated in some ways with the flood of Noah. It's another thing. So your mind goes back to that. It's the last time you heard about this stuff. And now it's associated with them. And you know, thing about this kind of bitumen, it burns. And then survivors fleeing to the hills. I wonder if in a few chapters we're going to see this happen. It's foreshadowing. So then this is the invading armies, took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food supply and departed. And they also took Lot, Abram's nephew, and his possessions and departed, because he was living in Sodom, which is a little bit of a change. Remember, he moved next to Sodom with his flocks and tents, but here he's actually, that was last week, and now he's living in the city. A little bit of creep there, huh? So here are the victorious international coalition army. They take the spoils of war, which is their right, and it includes people, because people are very valuable commodities in ancient warfare, because you can sell them, or you can use them for yourself as slaves. That's just how war worked. Slavery was often a matter of conquest of another people. If you just didn't want to kill everybody, you take when they can live, you'll feed them, you'll take care of them, but they'll just serve you, or you can sell them for cash. They're valuable. They're portable. It's a horrible, horrible thing. But in the mindset of the ancient world, why would you let the people go to waste and just kill them all? You wouldn't. There was a way to use them. So in the process of this, these invading armies also took Lot, who was Abram's nephew, because he was in Sodom, of course. They took his possessions too, and they left. So here is Lot, who, you remember the real estate he was looking at last week and thinking, man, that looks good. It's like the garden of the Lord. It turned out to be a bad investment because the neighborhood was not good. It was rich, it was wealthy, but it was just steeped in, as we'll find out, steeped in badness and wickedness, okay? Just like the king's names. So here is what happens. A survivor came, verse 13, and told Abram, the Hebrew. Now this is Abram, was residing by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Aner, and they were allies with Abram. So it's a common thing in ancient war descriptions. Well, how did you find out how the war went? Well, a survivor came and told us. So this is what happens here. Usually, survivors give very detailed accounts. But here, the survivor goes to Abram, the non-Canaanite. He's not from Canaan. And does he give a detailed account? We don't know. The authors don't include it because that's not relevant. What he does report that perks Avram's ears is the distress of his nephew. By the way, Hebrew in the Bible is never a term that the Israelites use for themselves. It's a term that Gentiles use of them, and that's what's going on here. To the survivor, this is Abram the Hebrew. The ancient Near East people knew Hebrews as the Apiru. They were considered low-class immigrants. They received it. It's like, no, we'll take that. We'll take that. God's with us. And here is Abram. He was residing by the oaks or trees, some say terebinths, whatever, of Mamre, or seeing. Mamre is this, is a word in Hebrew that has its letters kind of rearranged as a visual pun with more and other seeing words that have been used in the Abraham story. So Avram is living by the trees. This is Genesis 2 language. And he sees. He sees. And here we find out, for the first time we've heard that he was living by the oaks of Mamre, but what does that mean? Here's what we find out what that means, is that Mamre is the name of a dude. And not just any dude, he's an Amorite. Amorites, wait, I didn't think they were good people. But the idea here is Abram, as opposed to Lot, Abram is living at peace with the nations. He doesn't have to wait for the long-distant descendant of his to bless the nations. He's actually living it out already. He's blessing international people that live in this land. Strangest thing. So here are the three Amorite brothers. There's Mamre. It's a visual pun division. Eshcol, which means a bunch of grapes. So think fruit. And Aner. A little bit harder to decipher. There are scholars that think this is related to Aneram. The divine name Aram means exalted. Avram means exalted father, for example. So, exalted one, most high. Avram is living by the trees of seeing the fruit of the Most High, is where an ancient Israelite who's steeped in these names and definitions, where their mind might go here. The point is, whereas Lot has chosen this lush valley and it didn't work out at all, now he's a captive, he's in distress. Avram, who chose the hill country, the hard country, is living at peace with the nations, and he has real vision. He can see the fruit of the Lord. So verse 14. When Avram heard that his relative had been taken captive, well, he led out his trained men who were born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. Okay, he hears about how Lot is captured, and this would be the expectation. Expectation is, I knew he shouldn't have chosen that land. What a bad decision that was. Well, Lot, you made your bed, now you can lie in it. I mean, it's too bad, really, but what am I going to do about it at this point? I'm not going to pile on the tragedy. This is what happens when you make bad choices. And plus, it resolves this problem that I've had all this time when I probably shouldn't have brought him along to begin with, because Yahweh never told me to. So this is an expectation in the ancient Israelite reader that would be perfectly legitimate. Just let things play out. Lot made his bed, let him lie in it. That is not Avram's reaction to this at all. Abram is somehow addicted to grace. Okay. He's an agent of redemption. He's an agent of grace towards a relative that is completely undeserving. So he led out. This is a word, vayarek, in Hebrew, which is a word that means literally taking a sword out of its sheath. So now he's becoming a man of action. And Avram led out only the servants who had been born in his own household. In other words, the grown children of servants of his. Likely they would be the most loyal. And then it says there's 318 of them. So just random fact, throw it in there, right? No other numbers are mentioned at all in any of these armies or troop strengths or anything. We're just going to throw 318 because it's a historical fact. It's a historical fact that is included because the biblical authors see meaning in this number. And I think the meaning occurs to us in a couple of different ways. One, it apparently is a number that has been used in other ancient societies as like a stand-in for a bunch of people. So I think that's one aspect. But another aspect, it's a foreshadowing, I think. So there's this method of looking at Hebrew and Greek called gematria. Has anybody ever heard of gematria? Okay. It was very popular in New Testament times. And what it is you know how we have our numbers and they're Arabic numerals and they're different than our letters? You know that, everybody? Yeah. Okay. Well, in ancient Hebrew, that they did not have a separate group of numbers. The letters also stood in for numbers. So it was fun sometimes to go in and say, I wonder what, number this name adds up to. Or I wonder what this number spells out if we were to put read the letters out. It was a fun game. Now you can go too far with this. People have and come up with some really crazy ideas. But in this particular case, I find it interesting that the number 318 also spells out the name Eliezer, who is a character who's going to show up very soon in the mouth of Abram. So I wonder if there is something going on here where Abram is relying on Eliezer's, or putting his hope in an Eliezer to get something done. Just put a pin in that, tuck it away, because we'll be discussing that again in a couple of weeks. All right. So he went in pursuit as far as Dan. That's future Moses team writers who are explaining to their audience how far north it was, because Dan was not apportioned out as a territory until Joshua's time. So this is the Moses writing team that is explaining this. They're not using the geography of Avram's time. Okay. Then he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them, pursued them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. So Avram defeated a very numerically superior force, obviously, with wisdom. He used wisdom to do it, cunning. The coalition, they'd just been fighting giants and going all over Canaan, fighting all these people groups. They're exhausted. So what Abram does, he waits till they're sleeping at night, divides his forces so it seems like they're being attacked from all sides and by surprise in the middle of the night. And it would be very difficult for an army of any size in ancient times to overcome. And he pursues them all the way to north of Damascus. This is a long, long way. To pursue them and then defeat them and then bring back all their stuff to the oaks at Mamre would have taken weeks and weeks on foot. Verse 16, but he brought back all the possessions and also brought back his relative Lot with his possessions and also the women and the people. So what happens here is that Abram is not just in it for Lot. He rescues Lot, but there's a lot of ways he could have dealt with the rest of the people. These are Sodomites and Gomorrah people. These are people of the plain. He could be like, I got my nephew, good luck, guys. You're on your own. I mean, he's totally within his rights to do that. But he doesn't do that. These are soldiers and citizens of Sodom and Gomorrah, bad places, bad people. And by the rules of conquest in the ancient Near East at this time, it would mean that if he wanted to keep them, then the women were his to whatever he wanted to do. Does he want to enslave them? Does he want to make them his concubines? Does he want to sell them? By right of capture, they're his to do with what he pleases. All the other people could be slaves, or he could sell them. And this would be fully expected to recoup the losses that Abram had and the risks that he took. So the women and the people, they're like, well, we got a new master. He's going to do whatever he wants. This is the way it works in the world. But what did Abram actually do with these people? That's for next week's story. I like what Nahum Sarna, who's one of the great commentator in the book of Genesis. He writes, what are the purposes of Scripture in featuring this story? Undoubtedly, its primary motive is to bring into prominence new facets of Avram's character. In other words, these are facets that we haven't seen in the narrative so far. The one who displayed fear and evasiveness in Egypt now shows himself to be decisive and courageous in the Promised Land. The man of peace, like peace with Lot last week, knows how to exhibit skill and heroism in battle. He who experienced his nephew's estrangement unhesitatingly demonstrates self-sacrificing loyalty to him in his hour of need. The story serves to emphasize the virtues of loyalty to family, the redeeming of captives, the disdain of material reward, that's next week, and faith in the power of the few against the many. Okay, what would the first audience be thinking here? This is not like the battle stories that they hear. It's so odd to them. Where are all the details of smashing and destruction of the enemy and all the terrible things that were done to the enemy and the glorious heroism of the victor? So I wanted to read to you, because this is so much fun, an ancient Egyptian poem from about 1275 BC. So this would be after the time of Abraham. So it's during, and this is Ramesses II, a pharaoh, very powerful pharaoh. And here's the context, is if you care. The Egyptians had owned territory going all the way up to a place called Kadesh, which is like in the border of Lebanon and Syria now. But they kind of ruled all that area. But the Hittite Empire, which is in what's now Turkey, you know, over the years they kind of encroached, and they would take over those lands and just kind of, you know, incorporate them into themselves. And Ramses, who's a young king at this point, a young pharaoh, is like, I'm going to battle and I'm going to take Kadesh, this fortified city, back from the Hittites. And he went to battle and they fought a battle. And this is what Ramses, or his people anyway, wrote as a poem about his exploits. At dawn, I marshaled the ranks for battle. I was ready to fight like an eager bull. I arose against them in the likeness of Mont. That's Egyptian falcon-headed god of war. I was equipped with my weapons of victory, and I charged their ranks, fighting as a falcon pounces. See what he did there? The serpent on my brow felled my foes. You've seen the, like, you know, King Tut's sarcophagus where there's that snake coming out of the head. That's the uraeus. That's what he's talking about here. That snake on my brow, I know, it's bringing up all kinds of thoughts here. The serpent on my brow felled my foes, cast her fiery breath in my enemies' faces. See how the serpent and the dragon overlap? I was like, Reh. That's Egyptian sun god, primary deity. I was like Reh when he rises at dawn. My rays, they burned the rebels' bodies, and they called out to one another, beware, take care, don't approach him. Sekhmet the Great, which is the lion-headed goddess of war, is she who is with him. She's with him on his horses, her hand is with him. Anyone who goes to approach him, fire's breath comes over their body. Thereupon they stood at a distance, touching the ground with their hands before me. My majesty overpowered them. I slew them without sparing them. They sprawled before my horses and lay slain in heaps in their blood. Then the vile chief of Kati, his name was King Muotadi II, he rode and worshiped my name like that of Re, saying, you are Seth. It's the jackal-headed storm god. Baal, that's the Canaanite storm god. In person, the dread of you is a fire in the land of Kati. So he sent his envoy with a letter in his hand addressed to the great name of my majesty. Greeting the majesty of the palace, Re Harakti, the strong bull beloved of Ma'at. That's the goddess of truth, justice in the Egyptian way, with ostrich feathers. Anyway, the sovereign who protects his army, mighty on account of his strong arm, rampart of his soldiers in the day of battle, king of Upper and Lower Egypt. Upper's down there, lower's up here. I know it's weird. Usamare Sotpenne, the son of Re, the lion lord of strength, Ramesses, beloved of Amun, that's the god of the air with the ram's horn, given life forever. You see the difference between the story of Abram's battle and this? Abram is not fighting to achieve fame and glory. Oh, by the way, Ramesses didn't actually win the battle historically. This is all self-promotion. I mean, I guess technically it was like a, on points or whatever, split decision. He won, it wasn't a knockout, but he didn't have the strength in his army left to take the city, so he just had to go back to Egypt. But this is what he told everybody, so it seemed like he was great. But Abram is not interested in that, or the biblical authors aren't interested in that. Abram is out to show mercy, Hebrew chesed, to somebody who's been nothing but a problem to him. Look. And then other people get caught up in collateral mercy, even though they're bad guys. It's profoundly strange in the ancient world. So the true enemies of Abram are not foreign kings. In fact, Abram himself comes from Shinar. Ur is in the land of Shinar. This is like his people. The true enemies of Abram are the Canaanite locals, but he rescues them. Okay, how do we reflect? I think you can see this isn't just recording a historical event. It's a reframing of people's expectations. In a strange sort of way, Avram's going against his own people in order to rescue these local competitors at the least of his. He's acting against his own best interests to reflect the gracious character of Yahweh. Do we do this? Do we act against our own self-interest in order to reflect the gracious character of our God? So more is to come about Sodom and Gomorrah, but I want to take at least a minute or two and hear any reflections that our table might have. Who was your favorite king of all the 9 kings? The one you can't, yeah. The one you can't pronounce.
In verse 14, you said Abram instead is an agent of redemption and grace towards a relative that is undeserving. Yeah. You left out the words foreshadowing anyone, because this happened once again in the Bible, later on in the Bible.
Yes.
You also said that Abram was not fighting to achieve fame and glory. He's out to show hesed to someone who has been nothing but a problem to him.
Yes.
You have to draw the parallelism between that and what Jesus did for us.
Amen.
He didn't have to. He was living in peace and but yet he, the Prince of Peace, fought our battle to give us redemption and to give us grace.
So yes, so Abram here, he's between Bethel and Ai, passing tests and failing tests. In Egypt, he failed big time. Last couple stories, he's passed. So he's moving closer to Bethel right now in this story. And the New Testament looks back on these types of character traits, like you mentioned, as pointers to Jesus. Yeah, that's such a good, yeah, very good.
I try to pre-read this stuff before we come and listen to you explain it all. And when I read it, I read, these dudes came to fight these guys, and these dudes brought this many dudes. And it's one of those things where I say, I'm just going to read this really, really quick and get this part over with so we can get to the next chapter that may make more sense to my brain.
Yeah, that's what we do with the whole book of Leviticus, right?
Exactly, yeah. But then I come to the class and I'm like, and I've been to enough of your classes to know like this is gonna be explained in such a great way. I'm so excited about it now. But it blows me away. My wife and I have been praying to have ears to hear. And when I hear you preach about what's underneath this stuff, the seeds are falling on better soil, if that makes sense. And we're all just so blessed to be able to go deeper into what this stuff is and what it's actually saying versus what our brains in 2024 can comprehend.
The Bible's beautiful. It's just so, so beautiful. And I'm with you there. Crystal.
On the end of it, verse 16, it ends with women and then the other people, which is backwards for back then.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out.
Right, but is that why?
So I think you're onto something. There is a little foreshadowing of that hit me in the beginning, I think, of chapter 21 when I was doing the notes for that a couple of weeks ago, that had me in tears. And I can't wait to get there. But hold on to that. Women are listed before other people, which is not common at all in the ancient world. Something's up.
And then there was the two separate parentheticals. That is the Salt Sea and that is Zor. Zor is listed every time, but the city
Salt Sea, yeah.
is only listed that one time. Is there any relevance
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. That's a really good question. I think that, yeah, Zoar is mentioned multiple times in parenthetically, and the fact that this is the region of the Salt Sea only mentioned once. Yeah. Probably counting the times of Zoar. How many, is that 3 times?
2 of Zoar and 3 of Siddim. The
But-
third one being pyramids.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. That's Zoar. If that occurred 3 times, that might be a sign that a test is coming relating to that. But yeah, maybe. But I don't know. Good question. Okay, I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions from.
So this is kind of twofold, and it has to do with Sarah and Abraham's relationship. If Sarai and Abram was Abram's half-sister, then they broke Old Testament law in Leviticus 18:9. Don't have sexual relations with your sister, etc. Was their union blessed and not condemned? Why was their union blessed and not condemned by God?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a very good question. So, I mean, I guess the standard answer that I always heard in Bible college was, well, the laws didn't come till later, so Abram wouldn't have known. Which I don't think really answers the question, because the Moses team, who were very involved with the Levitical laws, are the ones writing this story out, and they could have skipped that part easily, could have skipped it, but the Holy Spirit didn't want that part skipped. So I suspect that the reason that this is included, even though every Israelite knows that this is not what you're supposed to do, is included to make aware the reader that this is not a hero-villain story. This is a complex and messed up couple like us in different ways. They're complex, they're messed up, and they fail more often than they pass sometimes. It seems that way at any rate. And we're not to approach this story as this is the couple that can do no wrong. So, and we're over time, I'm sorry, but we will try to get to more questions next week. Thank you all. You're amazing, and I love you as students.